Chapter 17, Post-War Confidence and Anxiety. How did social and economic changes after World War II affect Americans? So there's a couple different things that are going to be going on here. Americans are going to be confident about the direction that the economy is going. However, at the same time, there's going to be some anxiety, especially following post-World War II. And that anxiety really comes from a couple of different factors, and those are the things to pay attention to throughout uh, this chapter as we go. So this very first section, an economic boom. How did the nation experience recovery and economic prosperity after World War II? Those are the three objectives. What does this transformation look like? The accomplishments and challenges for Truman and Eisenhower, and then the overall 50s economic boom and the factors related to that. So when we look at this going from wartime to peacetime. First of all, you got to look at the number of people who served in the military. And when we have demobilization, so we're going from military to peacetime, wartime to peacetime. In July of 1946, the remaining 3 million servicemen are going to come home. So if you think about this in terms of employment, you have all of those individuals who are serving overseas, and they're going to be coming home looking for work. So that's going to cause a little bit of anxiety because there's people who are in the workforce. There's going to be shrinking jobs initially, and there's going to be increased number of people looking for jobs. The other thing is factories are going to need to convert from making tanks to making cars, from making guns to making toys. So that's going to be kind of a rough process. When you look at how Americans are expecting this process to go, 60% of them are pretty leery. They think that wages are going to drop. They think it's going to be hard to find work. And so they're really nervous about how this is going to go. So the government's going to respond to this by trying to come up with a way to make this transition a little bit easier, and that's where the GI Bill comes in. The GI Bill is going to provide unemployment payments to servicemen who can't find work. The other thing is how can we maybe pull some of these people out of the workforce and help them gain maybe skills that will help them advance and grow our economy. So the other thing is they give financial aid for servicemen to go to college, and you see 8 million Americans take advantage of that. Additionally, loans, low interest loans to buy homes and to start businesses. So again, by getting people into homes, that's going to boost home construction, and that's going to put a whole bunch of people to work. So this is a way to really be proactive about it, and this is an extremely effective program. The other thing that's going to kind of help fuel this economic boom is that when we look at the Great Depression, World War II, people had been putting off having families. And what's going to happen is post-World War II, post-Depression, people are ready to get married and have families. And so from this 1946 to 1964, roughly this nearly 20 years, 18 years, you're going to see this boom in the number of babies being born. 1957 is the height, and you have one baby being born every 7 seconds. Now, one of the things about this baby boom generation is because it is so big, it's going to dominate kind of all aspects of American history up to the present. And so TV, movies, products are really going to kind of center around the baby boomers because they're such a big part of the population. Now, not all of this goes well. I mean, we have the baby boom going on. We have the GI plan that works pretty well. But that initial drawback from wartime to peacetime is going to put kind of an economic blip out there. Because of the government ending price controls and ending the policy of rationing, what's going to happen is it's going to take the economy a little bit of time to find the proper price point. The other factor you have is that Americans had built up money over the war, and they're ready to spend it, except factories aren't producing consumer goods yet. So they have built up too much money, and there isn't enough stuff to be able to buy quite yet. So what's going to happen is we're going to see a dramatic increase in prices, And eventually that's going to flatline and it's going to decrease, but it takes a little bit of time for the market and the economy to figure out where it really kind of needs to be. As soon as those restrictions are gone and as soon as factories are up and running again, there's a flood of consumption. Americans are going to be buying all kinds of stuff all over the place. So because of that, there's an influx of money. You're going to see businesses are going to grow, they're going to expand. And as we mentioned before, this very small percentage of the world population is going to produce half of all the world's goods. And on top of that, they're going to be consuming a tremendous number of those goods. Some other things that's going to help boost productivity comes out of the war itself. So the atomic bomb is going to then lead to the use of atomic energy, so we're going to have these nuclear power plants, so you need engineers to design them, you need people to build them, you need other folks to run them, you need people who are going to need to update technology and security and all those types of things, so that's going to lead to a flood of new jobs. On top of that, you have computers that were developed for the war industry that's going to become mainstream and go into companies. That's going to help boost productivity. And that's really what we're going to see, is that you need fewer and fewer Americans to produce more and more things. And so American worker productivity is going to kind of skyrocket. And what that chart shows is that that productivity has continued to pretty much go on that same trajectory, although compensation and wages haven't quite kept up. Another factor in this is military spending. Even though you see that big boost of military spending, defense spending during World War II, and that drops, you're going to see the government continuing to spend money on technology and materials related to fighting the Cold War, and technology and universities and research. So the government's going to continue to kind of pump money into the economy, which is going to help fuel that growth. And then you also have the Marshall Plan that's going to lead to an increased demand of U.S. goods across in Europe, because part of the deal is if you're going to take aid from the United States, you have to turn around and buy American goods with that aid. And so that's going to help boost the economy as well. And so what you're going to see in terms of federal spending is that's going to pretty much drop quite a bit post-World War II, and then we're going to kind of see this continuing growth throughout. When we look at Truman, his accomplishments are somewhat small, to be honest with you, and we'll talk about the factors for that. He faces an awful lot of challenges. One is with labor and with Congress. So when we look at what's happening is you have that inflation that takes place right after price controls and rationing are done away with. And for the average worker, their wages aren't keeping up with that inflation. And so there's a bit of this freak out moment where workers are afraid that we're going to enter another Great Depression. They're not going to be able to afford things, and they're demanding higher wages. And the other thing is throughout the war, they hadn't gone on strike to get these higher wages either. They had done their work, and they knew that they couldn't go on strike because they needed to make sure that they were helping win the war. Well, now that the war is over, they think it's time to get higher wages. When the businesses aren't really willing to work with the workers, Truman is going to kind of side with the workers. On top of that, once the Republicans gain control of Congress, they're going to start passing legislation that is anti-union, and that's what the Taft-Hartley Act is. It's outlawing these closed shops, and in a closed shop, the management is forced to work with labor unions, and that people have to join labor unions or at least pay union dues to help pay for the negotiations that they do for all workers. Truman sees this as a step too far. He vetoes the bill. Congress is going to override the veto, but in a little bit we'll talk about how this is going to be a pretty good move for Truman in the end. The other place where he's fighting Congress is from his own party, the Southern Democrats, which are known as the Dixiecrats. They are anti-civil rights. They're anti-desegregation. They want to keep things separated and segregated. And so when Truman has this committee to investigate civil rights, this committee reports back to him and he is going to start to do things to move the country in the direction of the civil rights. However, Congress isn't willing to do that, and a big part of that is Republicans are working against him, and these Southern Democrats are working against him. So he uses an executive order to desegregate the military, which is going to move the country kind of in the right direction. When you look at him going into his reelection campaign, he is facing the challenge of the Republican candidate Dewey, who's pretty well known and famous. He has a splintering or fracturing Democrat Party where the Dixiecrats are going to nominate somebody, the progressives are going to nominate Wallace. So he doesn't even have a unified party to support and work behind him. He's going to go on this whistle-stop tour, and one of the things that he's really going to push is this do-nothing Congress, that they haven't really accomplished anything, they haven't really done anything, and it's a very effective message. On top of that, the labor unions are going to reward him for standing up to Taft-Hartley. African Americans are going to support him for desegregating the military, and what's going to happen is every single poll has him losing the election, but he's able to pull off his reelection. Now, he's going to try and pursue a fair deal, which is going to continue to strengthen the New Deal, and he's also going to push for national health care. But again, he's got a couple of tides that are going against him. One is he doesn't have congressional support, and the other thing is most of his money is going into fighting the Korean War, and so he doesn't have it to support these other programs. Eisenhower is going to have far more success. Eisenhower, not only does he chart a middle path, but he is a very centrist candidate. So much so that both political parties recruited him to run as president for him. So he could have run as a Democrat or as a Republican. He decided when he went through the checklist he was slightly more Republican than Democrat, and so he ran for the Republican Party. When you look at some of his policies, he does believe that the federal government has gotten to be too big, too strong, so he'd like to roll some of that back. However, at the same time, he's a big supporter of Social Security and believes that the minimum wage needs to be raised. And so you see on one side those conservative values of government being too big, and then you have those liberal values of kind of having this Social Security safety net, and that the government is there to kind of benefit the welfare of the people by encouraging an increase in minimum wage. And the other thing is you're going to see him with federal spending increase dramatically, not just for defense, but the interstate highway system and in education. And when you look at the interstate highway system, in case I forget to mention a little bit later on, it was called the National Defense System of Interstate Highways, or the National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. Part of the reason why the interstates were set up is for evacuation purposes. If there was ever a nuclear attack, we needed to be able to get major population centers and get people out of them as quickly as possible. And so that was kind of the impetus for the interstate highway system. Now, on top of that, it's also going to help ship goods, military defense items that need to be spread across the country to these major cities and research centers. That's why it was developed as well.